In the deserts of Middle Egypt, there are tombs no archaeologist has ever marked, chambers no map has ever acknowledged, and curses so old that even the desert wind refuses to speak them. Some tombs were hidden, others were erased, and a few were buried on purpose, not to protect what was inside, but to protect the living from what waited beneath. This is the story of a papyrus that should never have been read, a ritual that should never have been spoken, and a soul that was never meant to return. The desert remembers every name, and sometimes it demands them back. Layla knew the protocols. Every archaeologist did. You find an artifact, you document it, you stabilize it, and you hand it over. Especially something as fragile and significant as a papyrus scroll. She should have closed it the moment she realized what it was. Should have placed it gently into a sealed, climate-controlled container. She absolutely should have waited for the senior epigraphers and a proper, sanctioned translation team. But curiosity is a quiet hunger, a persistent whisper that logic often fails to silence. And the chamber, this particular chamber with its cracked columns and a floor that seemed to be slowly sinking into the bedrock, it felt like a place that demanded answers, not patience. It felt like a place that held a secret meant only for the one who found it. So instead of following procedure, she raised the papyrus toward the beam of her headlamp. The ancient ink, a deep, earthy red, glimmered again, catching the light as if it were still wet. The script was unusual, a late-period dialect mixed with symbols she didn't immediately recognize. But beneath the complex administrative text that covered most of the surface, she saw something else. Fainter, older markings. It was a palimpsest, a scroll that had been written on, scraped clean, and then written on again. But the original text hadn't been fully erased. There were instructions, a ritual, or a sequence comprised of 3 distinct segments. The first one was simple enough. A single line written in larger, more deliberate symbols than the rest. It was a name, or perhaps a title. She whispered it, softly, barely more than breath. It wasn't an incantation, not a deliberate summoning. It was more like testing the pronunciation, the way a linguist might sound out a forgotten word. A simple academic exercise. But the air in the tomb didn't know that. The air reacted instantly. Dust, which had lain undisturbed for millennia, lifted from the stone floor in a lazy, spiraling cloud. Tiny pebbles on the ledge beside her trembled, skittering like startled insects. And then came the sound, a low, trembling sigh that seemed to exhale from the very cracks in the floor, a sound like sand filling lungs after centuries of silence. It was a sound of release, of an impossible breath being taken for the first time in an eon. From the outer corridor, one of the local workers, hearing the vibration, called out to her, "Layla? Everything okay in there?" His voice, muffled by layers of rock, shattered the spell. Startled, she snapped back to reality. Her heart hammered against her ribs. With trembling hands, she quickly, almost guiltily, rolled the papyrus and slid it into her leather satchel. "Yes, all fine," she called back, her own voice sounding thin and unsteady. "Just a loose bit of rock," she lied, and the lie felt heavy in the sudden stillness. She pretended nothing had happened. But the chamber had heard her. The ancient stone had recorded her whisper, and something deep beneath the floor, something that had been waiting in the dark, had awakened. When Layla finally stepped out of the tomb that evening, the sun was setting, painting the cliffs in hues of orange and blood. The narrow wound in the earth, the entrance to the tomb, seemed different. It looked wider somehow, darker, as if the shadows inside had pooled and deepened, creeping closer to the opening. She shook her head, blaming fatigue and the desert heat, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, not by a person, but by the tomb itself, as if something inside had moved closer to the edge of its prison, listening, waiting. That night, Layla returned to her small, sparsely furnished rented flat in the village of Beni Hassan. The day's work had left her exhausted, but a different kind of energy, a nervous excitement, coursed through her. She peeled off her dusty gloves, washed the grime of the desert from her hands, and with a reverence she hadn't felt in the tomb, placed the papyrus carefully on her work table. Under the single buzzing light bulb of her flat, it looked even more profound, a relic connecting her directly to a forgotten world. But as she watched, she noticed something was wrong. The papyrus wasn't still anymore. The delicate, brittle edges began to curl inward, then outward, shifting like dry leaves in a wind that didn't exist within the sealed room. The red ink seemed to darken before her eyes, becoming richer, almost liquid, as if it had absorbed the dim lamplight and now pulsed with a faint internal glow. It had to be a trick of the light, she told herself, a hallucination brought on by dehydration and lack of sleep. She turned away, just for a moment, to grab her water bottle from the counter. A single brief moment was all it took. When she looked back, the room was no longer empty. Something stood in the far corner where the shadows were deepest. It was a shadow itself, but distinct from the others, tall, impossibly elongated. It had a humanoid shape, but it was hollow like a figure sculpted from smoke, with no source to sustain it. It had no features, no face, yet she felt its gaze. It was a void in the shape of a man. Her breath hitched. She blinked hard, her eyes watering from the strain. And just like that, it was gone. The corner was empty again. Only the papyrus lay on the table, looking like nothing more than a piece of ancient paper. But the feeling in the room had changed. It felt inhabited now, occupied by a presence older than words, older than stone. Sleep did not come easily that night. Layla tossed and turned, the cheap cotton sheets tangling around her legs. Every time she closed her eyes, the image of the shadow figure burned behind her eyelids, but it was more than just a memory. She felt a presence standing beside her bed. A profound coldness settled on her ribs, seeping through the blankets, chilling her to the bone. Then came a weight, a distinct, localized pressure pressing into the mattress, right beside her hip, as if someone had just sat down on the edge of the bed. Her eyes flew open, but she saw nothing. She strained her ears, listening for a breath, a footstep, anything. There was only the sound of her own frantic pulse. She twisted beneath the sheets, her body rigid with fear, expecting to see someone there, to come face to face with an intruder. She didn't. The room was empty. But the darkness beside her bed wasn't normal. It was thicker than it should be, more substantial. It felt dense, patient, and terrifyingly alive. It wasn't just the absence of light. It was a presence made of shadow. Layla lay perfectly still for what felt like hours, not daring to move, hardly daring to breathe, acutely aware that she was no longer alone in her room, and that whatever she had disturbed in that forgotten tomb had followed her home. The ritual was not over. It had just begun. By morning, Layla was a ghost of herself, pale, tired, She wasn't even sure if she had slept. The shadow from her room, that impossible shape, had lingered in her mind all night. She had to get back to the dig site. She craved the blinding daylight, the clamor of the crew, the mundane noise of people working, anything to drown out the memory, to dull the echo of that thing that had watched her. Her team, practical men and women of science, saw the tremor in her hands as she sipped her coffee. They saw the dark circles under her eyes, but they said nothing. In the desert, everyone has their demons. They just assumed hers were of the ordinary kind. Back inside the tomb, the air was different, still and heavy like a held breath. She approached the chamber where she'd found the papyrus. The black slab she had moved, the one that hid the scroll, was now leaning outward, farther than she had left it, as if something from within the darkness behind it had given it a powerful shove. Her lamp flickered as she stepped closer. The air felt compressed, too dense for a room of this size. It was a physical pressure against her skin. And then she saw it, something she had missed in her excitement the day before. A thin groove carved into the floor, right beneath where the stone slab had rested. It was a slit in the rock, no thicker than a finger, leading deeper into the earth. And from it, a faint, warm breath exhaled against her ankles. Her mind raced back to the papyrus. The text had mentioned 3 segments, a ritual in 3 distinct steps. Asterisk return requires a door. Return requires a voice. Return requires a vessel. Asterisk, the chilling realization washed over her. She had already provided the first 2. By finding the hidden chamber and moving the slab, she had opened the door. And by speaking that first line of text aloud, she had given it a voice. She pulled the fragile scroll from its protective tube. The second line of the ritual, which had been just faint ink before, was now glowing. A soft, sickly light pulsed from the ancient fibers, as if the papyrus itself was reacting to the chamber's energy. She stared at the words, her mind screaming at her not to read them. She didn't. She wouldn't. But something else did. A whisper rose from the floor. It slithered out from that thin crack in the rock, reciting the very words she had tried so hard not to remember. Ancient guttural syllables slid through the air like serpents made of pure sound. The voice was dry, dusty, like something that hadn't spoken in millennia. Layla staggered back, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her lamp sputtered, flickered once more, and died, plunging her into absolute darkness. The whisper didn't stop. It grew louder, and it wasn't just one voice anymore. It was many, a chorus of the dead, all speaking the same line, commanding the ritual forward, pulling something from the other side. The presence she had sensed in her room last night was no longer just following her. It wasn't watching anymore. It was forcing its way into the world. She turned and fled, scrambling out of the tomb, bursting into the late afternoon sun, gasping for air. But the desert outside felt wrong. The air was warmer, unnaturally so, even as the sun began to sink toward the horizon. The vast landscape was still, but it wasn't a calm stillness. It was the tense, coiled silence of a predator about to strike. The dunes themselves seemed to be holding their breath. Her colleagues saw the sheer panic on her face. One of the foremen rushed to her side, asking what was wrong. She tried to warn them, to explain, but the words caught in her throat. What could she possibly say? That a 3,000-year-old papyrus was whispering to her? That shadows were moving on their own without a light source to cast them? They would laugh. They would call her crazy, attribute it to sunstroke. Or worse, so much worse, they might actually believe her. Defeated, she returned to her small flat as dusk settled over the village. The moment she opened the door, she froze. The papyrus, which she had left safely rolled in its tube, was now spread flat on her table, unrolled by invisible hands. And the third segment, the final part of the ritual, was pulsing with a soft, rhythmic light, like a heartbeat. She didn't dare touch it. She didn't even want to look at it. But she heard something else. Footsteps. Behind her. Soft, measured, deliberate. Growing closer. With every ounce of courage she had left, she turned around. The shadow was there. But it wasn't just a vague shape this time. It was visible, solid in its own terrifying way. Tall, impossibly tall, and skeletal. Its form rippled like heat rising from sun-baked stone. And inside its hollow frame she saw fleeting glimpses of another time. A golden throne room, a serene burial mask of a long-dead king, hands folded peacefully over a chest. She saw eyes that had been closed for centuries, not in the peace of death, but in patient, hungry anticipation. The papyrus wasn't just a text. It was a key. It was a promise. It was a contract signed between the world of the living and the world of the entombed. And Layla had signed it the moment she spoke that first fateful line. The shadow raised a spectral arm. Its fingers stretched out long, thin, trembling with an ancient hunger. On the table, the papyrus lifted into the air on its own, rising slowly as if held by an unseen force. The ink on its surface began to run, but not down. It dripped upward, defying gravity. The symbols detached from the page, floating off and circling the room like moths made of pure darkness. The third and final line of the ritual began to form in the air before her. It wasn't written. It was a symbol from the living shadows coalescing in the room. Layla backed away until she hit the wall, her hands clamped over her mouth to stifle a scream. She understood now. The final line did not need to be spoken. It needed a vessel. It needed her. The shadow expanded, stretching until it filled the entire room, wrapping around her like a dark, silken cocoon. Her breath caught in her throat. Her fingers went numb, then her arms. Her vision began to tunnel, the edges darkening as if the world was being snuffed out. The air turned heavy and thick, saturated with the smell of ancient sand, royal decay, and the cloying scent of old linen and funerary oils from a tomb sealed for ages. Her heart, which had been racing, began to slow. Her limbs grew weak, losing all strength. The shadow leaned in, its non-face level with her own. And deep inside that swirling void, she saw eyes. Eyes opening for the very first time in 3,000 years. They were not human eyes. They were pharaonic eyes, filled with the cold eternity of endless desert nights. The papyrus, still floating in the air, flashed once, with a brilliant, blinding light, and then burst into ash. The shadow entered her, and in that instant, Layla Anwar was gone. The next morning, the workers at the dig site waited for their lead archaeologist. She never arrived. A search of her flat found it empty. But her neighbors told a strange story. They had heard footsteps all night long, heavy, rhythmic, pacing back and forth without rest. On her work table, where the priceless papyrus should have been, there was only a thin line of black powder, like fine soot, and in the center of the ash, a single perfect fingerprint. Around the table, the floorboards bore faint indentations, the shape of a body having stood still for hours. A body that was far too tall to be human. Back at the dig site, investigators went to re-examine the collapsed chamber. The heavy black slab was missing, vanished. The thin groove in the floor behind where it had stood was now wider, a dark opening large enough for a person to pass through. And from somewhere deep within that subterranean darkness, they all heard it. A faint, slow exhale, like a first breath taken after centuries of waiting. Some say the desert buries its secrets deep beneath the sand. Others say it protects them. But there are some secrets that even the desert fears. Names that were deliberately erased from history. Rituals whispered only once and then forbidden. And rulers whose souls were not destroyed, not dead, merely waiting. The papyrus was never meant to be found. The ritual was never meant to be spoken. And the one who returned was never meant to walk among the living again. In Egypt, they have an old saying, the dead do not rise unless someone opens the door. And the door is open now. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next descent into the darkness.